if there's foods that are organic, there's obviously got to be foods that are not organic, and even just understanding that concept, you start to think about what we're consuming in a bit of a different way. But to give you an insight, like a mature Hereford or Angus cow will be 650 to 700 kilos. So you're looking at a cow that's 2/3 the size. So they're a lot smaller. And why is that important? Well, to me, they've got a lower impact on the environment. A lot of people don't realize it wasn't very long ago we didn't eat marbled beef, and we were not accustomed to marbled beef when they started American feedlots, because they needed to figure out what to do with all this corn that the government was subsidizing farmers to produce. And they started feeding it to cattle and creating marbled cattle because these cattle were getting obese. They had to market and try and convince people what to do with all this marbled beef. And, so we've sort of lost that food intelligence, and now we're all accustomed to marbled beef, but it's not the norm and it's not what we're used to.
This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Decentralized Radio. Today, we have Jacob Wolki on the line down here in Australia, both of us. So this is fun. Wish it was in person, but we're making do. How's it going, man?
Doing well, thank you. Doing really well. It's hot, so we're slowly trying to remember what living in hot Australia feels like.
Yeah, for me, I went from just getting colder and colder, so it's probably in the 10s, 15s, 20 C when I left Wyoming, and now it's getting up there in I think this couple days here is mid-30s down here. It's pretty toasty. So I guess this is end of spring, right?
Yeah, and we've had spring. The last 2 years have been really wet, and the weather's been pretty mild in terms of high temperatures. So everyone in town's complaining that we don't have, we're not heat fit, having to relearn it all again. So it gets pretty hot. We tap out at sort of like mid to high 40 degrees Celsius, which is halfway to boiling basically. Wow. So it's can be unpleasant.
So is this year is then it's very dry, right? Because up here in Queensland, it's from who I've talked to. I talked to Bryant briefly at Eastwell. We went out there, and they were saying it's kind of like the driest time for decades for this time of year.
Yeah, look, down here where we are, we're probably some of the more resilient country in Australia. We have pretty, where we are in a big valley, it channels a lot of weather in. So, all my lease blocks are pretty well protected. We still get the heat, but our rainfall's pretty regular. So, if we get caught in a drought unaware down here, it's really joke on us, because we see it just creep down the east coast all the way to where we are. They're all sort of the canary in the coal mine for our weather systems.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's a bit, you got a bit more protection from the mild climate aspect, I guess. So cool. Well, I guess let's kick it off. Your backstory, it sounds like you kind of had this unique entry to regenerative farming, maybe a bit untraditional from the folks we've talked to, but it's always a spectrum. And I find that sometimes the people who are most open to it were the ones who didn't have to unlearn anything. They're not fifth generation ranchers or farmers. And I know you kind of were just an entrepreneur and dove right into this. So yeah, maybe you could shed some light there for our listeners on kind of how you got into regenerative farming or agriculture.
Yeah, sure. It was really the colliding of two different things at the same time. I was married, freshly married, just had our first son. So my wife and I were starting to get interested in organic foods, wanting to do the right thing, and had this awareness that, if there's foods that are organic, there's obviously got to be foods that are not organic, and even just understanding that concept, you start to think about what we're consuming in a bit of a different way. And I started just gardening in the backyard, wanting to create some better food. And I went down a bit of a YouTube rabbit hole, and I got introduced to guys like Joel Salatin. And I thought that looked really fun. I'd like to raise some meat and eggs for myself. So my parents had a little piece of land, and I leased it off them and started moving the cattle around a bit different and started doing the chickens a little bit different. And it just sort of snowballed out of control. There was never this master plan to do this sort of farm business that we've got now. It really just started to feed ourselves. And about that same time, when we were looking at better quality food for our family, I started going down a real welfare rabbit hole also, and watched a few of those expose-style documentaries that are, going inside of feedlots and factory farms and slaughterhouses and looking how, things are really done at the scale that really feeds the world at the moment. And I just looked at it all and I thought, I don't really want to be a part of that. I don't like the way those animals are having to be fed, medicated diets just to prevent them from becoming ill, because the environment they're in is so inherently toxic that it's just a matter of time. I thought there's got to be a better way than that. So it was really wanting to do better by the animals and also having a really great food source for ourselves. And we just started with a couple cattle and a few chickens and started pushing them around the paddock, trying to be Joel Salatin and copy all of his systems. And that was 2019.
Wow. That's kind of cool that you just started small and kind of realized that this was an opportunity at hand, because I feel like that's the best way to learn. And I know Joel Salatin always preaches that biting off more you can chew at first is probably the biggest mistake you can make. So it seems nice that you kind of had that playground, but still the fact that it was unintended. At what point did you realize, hey, this is like a really viable business model? Because traditionally, ranchers and farmers, they're making no money and they're getting aged out. The next generation doesn't want to inherit their farm or their ranch. And it's because there's not a lot of money in it. But, if you change the system and the business model, you can obviously do quite well, as you've realized. What was that moment like for you?
Look, agriculture is just like any other industry where, you could compare it to supermarkets, you could compare it to bricks and mortar, gift stores, whatever. Some people are really good at running their business and making money, and some others are not. Just because you're a farmer doesn't mean that you have this benevolent right to make money. Some farmers are just bad business people. So there's a lot of hugely successful, enormous, very wealthy farmers out there. We processed our first body of beef for ourselves, and it made sense to put 2 on the truck instead of 1 and cut a bit of extra beef and try to sell it to people. It's harder than I thought. I thought I'd go to all my family and friends and go, oh, look, here's this grass-fed animal that wasn't drenched and we never sprayed the pastures. Would you like to buy 5 or 10 kilos of beef? And no one did. No one wanted it. I had to really beg people and leverage those relationships and guilt trip them into buying our beef. And, I fought pretty hard. But then we got a lot of really great feedback. And after they bought that first piece, they wanted some more. And I thought, geez, maybe if instead of just doing 1 a year for me, I had 20 head in the paddock at that time. I thought maybe I can send 2 off every month and just see what happens. And very quickly it became obvious to me that there was an enormous processing bottleneck. So we were in Australia. You have to send your animals to if you want to sell it for retail, you got to send it to a slaughterhouse, and then it gets consigned back to a local boning room, like a butchery, and then those butchers will cut and pack it for you. And there was just an enormous labour bottleneck there. The butchers that I was using they couldn't handle any real meaningful volume. They wanted to do a body of beef a month for me. And I thought, well, no one's ever going to build a meaningful business around selling 12 cows a year. So the building I'm sitting in right now came up for sale end of 2020. It's a butchery that's been in town here for about 70 years, and it was closed down, and all the equipment had been sold. It was all empty. And my wife and I thought, well, let's give it a red hot crack. Let's buy the butchery and hire some butchers of our own and not be confined by that 1 body a month, ceiling that had been put on us when we were outsourcing that part of our operation. And I guess you could say that that's when we really decided to have a go and see if we could make it work. So we've been here for 3 years now. I think we actually bought it's almost smack on 3 years since my first butcher started, and it's been a wild ride. It's, we've thrown a lot of mud at the wall trying to see what sticks and learned a lot of lessons, a lot of enterprises, a lot of spinning plates going on, and I love it.
Hey friend, thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education.
Yeah, I think that's That's a great way to approach the issue, because identifying the problem first and then actually just going directly to solve the problem for yourself, because that's the same issue in the US as well. The USDA is such a pain in the ass, and the processors. It's a huge bottleneck for everyone. And I know during COVID, it was even more of a problem. And we're still, at the bison ranch I work with, we've now, went from a processor to another processor. They both got bought out and had new ownership. And then we went back to the original one now. So it's just always this kind of like back and forth. So I think if you do really want to be serious about scaling a meat business, you pretty much have to just take that jump of faith and just do it yourself like you have. It's not cheap though, of course, but if you find something that works, then you just have that control and you have that ability to not have to worry about outsourcing the quality to other people. So, and then you made this butcher to also kind of cut costs. You made it more of like a community-based, like self-service approach, right? Because that was the smashing thing that I saw on social media.
When we purchased the butchery, we only wanted to operate it as a boning room to process our animals, because at that stage we had a couple accounts we had a couple organic supermarkets, a couple restaurants, and then the rest was just sold, off Facebook. People would just inbox me, hey Jake, what have you got? Give me 10 kilos of beef or whatever it is. And everything we were producing was already spoken for, so it didn't make any sense to open a storefront here. And even if I culled all of our other sales outlets and forced everything to go through the shop front here, it wasn't enough business to justify an extra wage. I think that year 2020 we were set to do 400 grand revenue roughly, and you put someone out the front here on minimum wage, $60,000. There's all your profit out of a $400,000 turnover business. If you were netting 60, you'd probably be happy with that double digits net profit, and it would have all just been wasted. So there was just no point. But I kept getting asked. Everyone kept saying, "When's the shop going to open? When's the shop going to open?" And I thought to myself, well, the only way it's going to work is if I can mitigate that wage liability. I'd rather spend wages on labour on the farm, scaling, or labour in the butchery, doing more processing. So I just came up with this concept that it's staffless. It's like a 24-hour gym. You become a member by doing a farm tour. You use a pin on the door. You let yourself in 24/7. Everything's in freezers, cryovac packed, portioned, labelled, and then you use an app on your phone to scan the labels, add them to your shopping cart, and then you pay with your debit card. There's a little EFTPOS machine in here, and there's a few locals that use Bitcoin, and they've just got one of my wallets saved in their phone, and I just trust them to go for that. So we've got some security cameras in here. It is monitored, but we've been doing this for almost 3 years now, and we've had absolutely zero issues.
Yeah, that's so smart. And I have, now that you say it, I actually have been to a gym like that before. And yeah, it was pretty nice, right? Because the wages are such a large cost. And now I'm thinking we have this local farm store in Wyoming, and they send out an email to all the producers like, hey, how can we cut costs? How can we make more money? And obviously the biggest cost for them is the wages. So I don't know if it's feasible to do the exact same thing, but I'm sure they could model it to some degree to have that. And the farm tour is a genius idea, because that just goes along with just being connected to where your food comes from. So yeah, I love it. I think that's so smart. But I kind of want to get into how Australia maybe is a bit different from the US in general in terms of beef production. So you mentioned earlier that right when you convinced people to take your beef, they were all about it once they tried it. Something I've realized, especially in the rural US, Wyoming, and just everywhere, people are actually really, really accustomed to that grain-fed beef taste. Is that not as prevalent here in Australia, or is that also an issue? Like, is almost the vast majority of everything just being grain finished for quite some time, and people being used to that, nice grain fat flavor?
I can't speak for all of Australia, but in my area, it's never really been something that I've been sort of aware of. You go to a restaurant and it'll say, here's your 3 steaks and 2 are grain fed and 1's pasture fed. You see that a lot. But, the part of the world that I live in, we've got a lot of country that's very good for finishing ruminants on grass. We can turn out, everything in this area, no problem. So I think if you go further north, where their seasons are more volatile, They run a lot more feedlots to get that consistency out of their product, and maybe up in those regions they're more accustomed to the taste out of feedlotted cattle. But I think our feedlotted cattle here, like, I'm not an expert on feedlotting, but I think that they run a little bit different to yours. And from my understanding, in America there's a big there's a lot of effort put around, corn fed and a lot of corn in the diets. But I think our diets here in the grain, in the feedlots, are a bit more varied. So maybe it doesn't have such a token trademark taste. I'm really not sure, but there's definitely a huge acceptance and a huge movement of people wanting grass-fed and finished beef here. It's not, you don't have to twist people's arm. I could triple my beef production tomorrow and sell out regularly. People want it.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic to hear. I mean, that's good, because I think it's like this unlearning, or kind of these hurdles that a lot of areas, a lot of people in general have to jump over. And yeah, that's kind of something that you had the luxury of, just getting into it, kind of how you did. So how are you approaching your management style differently now compared to when you started 3 years ago or 4 years ago in 2019?
Well, I guess when I started, I was really just
obviously growing the herd, I imagine. Well,
when I started, I guess one big difference is I was actually just stocking. So I'd go and I'd buy weaners, young steers and heifers, anywhere from sort of 6 to 12 months old, whatever was a good buy. And then I'd put them on my pasture, again, anywhere from sort of 4 to 12 months to get them up to weight and finish them off. And then I'd process them. And the reason I did that was, when I ran the numbers 4 years ago, you could go and buy a nice yearling weaner for $800, $700, and you could turn it off in 6 months and turn it into 4 or 5 grand's worth of beef, like on a balance sheet. It just did tremendously well. And then over 2021 and 2022, throughout all the lockdowns and the boom, we had a real big price boom in our industry because a drought broke and everyone was buying livestock to build numbers. And those same $800 animals were now $2,500. And I couldn't afford to buy them for $2,500 and feed them for 6 months and then spend $1,000 processing them to get 4 or 5 grand back on them. Like, the whole thing didn't work. So I actually shifted my whole business to no longer just solely buying animals, trading animals, but I actually shifted into breeding. And it was just that time, around that whole time, when I was looking for what animals I wanted to breed, I got introduced to Inguni cattle, which you mentioned, Brian Usher from Eastwell Farms. Well, he was sort of indirectly the guy that introduced it to me. Dr. Max Goldhain was a customer of Brian's up there, and Brian was telling Max about the Inguni, and then Max let me know about them, and I bought my first bull that night. And I've got 5 or 6. How many have I got? We've got 6 Inguni bulls now, and we're breeding very aggressively towards Inguni bloodlines because the animals are just so resilient. So I guess one management technique is, we're no longer just trading. We're really trying to hone down on breeding animals where our sole ambition is to breed the most vigorous, healthy representation of what a bovine is. I'm not, and this is really heretical in our industry. Like, when I say this, other beef producers just sort of roll their eyes at me, but I'm not putting any effort into marbling. I'm not putting any effort into beef tenderness. I'm not putting any effort into flavour or taste. All my effort is going into fertile, vigorous, healthy, long-living animals that are just a real abundant representation of what a cow is, because I believe that if we can start with that animal as our building block and steward our environment really well, chemical-free, mimicking nature, I believe that our default byproduct, I believe quality meat, quality beef is just going to be a byproduct of those earlier decisions. So I can't trade anymore. I'm all in on this Inguni thing, and we're doing the same with our sheep and very similar things with our pigs as well. So we've scaled a lot of things. We're by no means a large farm, although we do want to become a large farm. We don't have any. This space is sort of really crowded with commie types who want to descale and depopulate, and everything has to be micro and niche, and that's fine. I've got nothing against people who want to run a micro farm, but I'm a maxi farmer. I want to run a huge farm in a huge mob and feed heaps of people and restore heaps of landscape, and I'm not embarrassed to say it. So we're scaling, instead of my first lot of pigs I bought I had 3 pigs in the front paddock, and we fed them up and ate them, and now we're on track this year to do 350 pigs. We're basically turning off a pig a day. So, where the systems on the farm are probably a step behind where our appetite is. We're constantly trying to catch up.
I love it, man. Wow. So much that I want to dive into there. But first, the Nguni cattle, definitely something I've been learning more about from you, Max, Brian, and it seems really cool. And Max mentioned he kind of thinks of it similarly to how the bison are here in North America. It's that kind of just breed that hasn't been tampered with as much over so many generations to become more docile and more for the centralized industrial feedlot system that's easy to scale. So I think that approach is spot on, right? Like we need to think about it from the quality perspective, from the resilience, not just the end product, because then it'll show up how it needs to on your plate. So I guess give me a little more insight on the Nguni. I have a bit. They kind of come from Africa, right? And the tribes really didn't mess with the breeding selection too much over generations. So inherently, they're more resilient because they're just a more, I guess, ancestral breed of cattle. Is that right?
Yeah, like the Zulu people in South Africa are the traditional stewards of the Nguni cattle, and they did very little to mess. Like they didn't breed them in a sophisticated manner. The animals just bred. The only thing that they did, I'm sure they did a lot of little things, but the main thing that they did that has influenced the breed, which is really interesting, is all the biggest bulls, they castrated them and turned them into oxen, turned them into steers to pull their wagon. And what that's done is it's kept all the smallest bulls as the bulls that would be breeding the cows. So it's kept the breed small. So, one real big contrast between an animal like an Nguni versus a traditional British breed, which is, an Angus or a Hereford or whatever it might be, is they're 2/3 of the size. They're anywhere from half to 2/3 of the size. So I've got Nguni cows, mature cows in the paddock that are weighing between 400 and 450 kilograms. Your American listeners are going to have to get on Google and justify using an imperial measuring system.
It's like 1,000 pounds.
And try and figure that out. What a joke. But, to give you an insight, like a mature Hereford or Angus cow will be 650 to 700 kilos. So you're looking at a cow that's 2/3 the size. So they're a lot smaller. And why is that important? Well, to me, they've got a lower impact on the environment. So, when a paddock floods, they don't pug it up as hard. They mature earlier. They grow into their potential faster and they become mature and fertile and ready to breed earlier. So it speeds up our breeding cycle and our scaling. And I can actually run more of them because their consumption's lower for maintenance. So I can run, 3 Nguni cows to 2 Angus cows, just based on, weight. So I can have more animals on the same block of land. And they've got so many different things to offer. They're naturally parasite resistant, and this isn't a big drama for us because the way we manage our cattle always keeps us ahead of parasite burden anyway. And we don't have tick pressure. But if you're in a coastal area in Australia with big tick burdens, they don't bother the Nguni at all. They excrete natural oils through their skin and their hair that sterilizes these ticks and knocks them off, which is just the most incredible thing to have this. Natural defense. It's chemical warfare. The Nguni are equipped with chemicals to go to war with these external parasites, which is so fun. There are lots of different colors, easy carving, and everything I've said about I don't care about the meat quality. Well, I actually do because we eat the thing. But I do stand by what I said about it being a byproduct. But we have eaten quite a bit of Nguni, and it's exceptional meat. It's very good meat.
Is it, well, you mentioned the calving. That was going to be something I asked about because, like, the bison, you don't even have to do anything with them. So that's, a huge benefit. Probably not as huge of a deal here, but, like, in the U.S., especially in the winter, calving is such a problem for so many ranchers. So that's what I figured. Is the meat, are they just leaner in general as well because they haven't been bred for, like, fat, docile,
so they,
if you want to say?
They've got a good yield. Their percentage of yield is actually quite respectable. They're punching very well, so it makes sense on a balance sheet in that regard. They've got a good fat cap. If they're finished properly, there is a little bit of marbling in them, but it's not extensive. I've got my questions as to whether marbling is something that we should be aspiring to within our selection for genetics, because it looks to me, and we're trying to draw parallels between humans and ruminant herbivores, and I understand there's differences there, but every example I see of marbling is less than ideal. It's obesity, it's pre-diabetic or diabetic, it's elderly, whatever it might be, and you look at the cross-section of a muscle out of an athlete, versus some fat old person, you got one that's marbled, one that's not. And if you take that example over into the animal kingdom, all of our most nutrient-dense red meats, elk, venison, all these wild animals that haven't had marbling pushed into them. A lot of people don't realize, but we didn't used to eat. It wasn't very long ago. We didn't eat marbled beef, and we were not accustomed to marbled beef when they started American feedlots, because they needed to figure out what to do with all this corn that the government was subsidizing farmers to produce. And they started feeding it to cattle and creating marbled cattle because these cattle were getting obese. They had to market and try and convince people what to do with all this marbled beef. And, so we've sort of lost that food intelligence, and now we're all accustomed to marbled beef, but it's not the norm and it's not what we're used to. And the Nguni have a little bit of marbling in it, but you look at it and it looks like the cross-section out of an athlete. It looks like somebody who's an animal that's fit for purpose, healthy, vigorous, beautiful dark color to it. So, to me, the fat's in all the right places on the Nguni.
Yeah, and it's so funny because it has been such there's been such a change in our perception of meat quality and taste and flavor, like I kind of mentioned in the beginning, and there's always this logical perspective that the quality or the health of the animal that you're eating is going to correlate to the health it provides for you. Like, that's obviously a logical statement to have, but for the longest time, that was kind of misconstrued. It wasn't that big of a deal. Now we've had Stefan von Fleet on the podcast. He said pretty much the exact same thing you said, that pasture-raised animals look like athletes, feedlot beef look like, obese, diabetic people, metabolic syndrome. So there is a difference. And then wild game has, the most biodiverse feed, the most biodiverse pastures and forage that they're consuming. So they have the most biodiverse nutrients as well. And if you have an animal that's kind of bred or lack of breeding over generations, that's kind of designed to be thriving in that sort of environment, yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. I think it's amazing that this is becoming like a trend and momentum, and now we have data to back this up. And yeah, so is there any environment like the Nguni are not like really great in? Like, do you think this could be a worldwide thing? Like, should we start raising Nguni in the US, or are there specific environments that they're really optimized for? Obviously Africa, Australia is pretty warm, hot climate.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. I get sort of sledged a little bit for having Nguni in my area because we're such a good, we're known for being such a good green, consistent area. But the reality is it gets hot here, and we're brittle. Like if you study your holistic management, you talk about brittle, non-brittle. We're completely brittle for 4 to 5 months of the year. The farms are all the grass is dried off, and it's just hay standing in the paddock, and that's when the Nguni really thrive. And do they do well on green grass? Of course they do. All ruminants do. So our climate is actually very similar. Across Australia is actually very similar to a lot of places in South America, South Africa rather. So I think that they're perfectly suited for here. The stud that I buy my seed stock off, he's a bit further north. It's Edwin Roos at Henham Nguni in Australia. He's just north of Canberra. And he has some calves calved down in winter where he gets -7 degrees Celsius with a big wind chill on that. So that's 7 degrees Celsius below freezing. And these cows are calving down in that and having no issues with it, able to get their calf up. So I don't think that that's probably the optimal spot for the Nguni. That's a very cold environment. I don't think you go to America and put them in areas that get meters of snow every year. But, you guys already, there's no Nguni in America from my knowledge, but you guys do definitely have fit for purpose animals all over your country that are very similar. So you've got your piney woods. If I was in America, I'd be looking at getting some piney woods going, or you've got Mashona. Mashona cattle are very becoming quite popular in America with all these sort of alternative farmers. Mashona is actually and Nguni ecotype. So they're related out of South Africa. So they're basically just Nguni that have been selected for black, no horns, and a fleshier disposition. And I think that they're sensational animals and just as good. But, America's got plenty of hot, sort of arid areas within it that these animals would thrive in, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking like just southern half of the U.S. would probably be a great fit, really, to be honest. So have you noticed since, or I guess, are you breeding them into your herd that was not Nguni as well? So are you getting a mix, or are you trying to like isolate the Nguni and only, I guess, grow a herd that's kind of very high percentage? So how is that working with your herd?
I'm breeding up. So in Australia, there's less than 250 purebred Nguni cows. I purchased 2 purebred Nguni cows at an auction. I was lucky enough to get them. They were 8 years old each with a calf at foot. So that's a pretty old cow. And I spent, $8,000 plus taxes, plus freight on each animal, which is just crazy, especially for the age of the animal. But the genetics are just so hard to come by. The bulls are cheaper because bulls are sort of dime a dozen. Easy to produce more of them. Everyone wants to keep their girls. So I've got a couple purebreds that we're breeding pure and keeping pure progeny out of. But mainly I'm breeding up. So what I've done is I've bought a heap of Jersey cows that are retired out of dairies, Jersey milking cows, and I'm breeding in Nguni then I bought them because they're cheap. They're mature when I buy them, so I don't need to wait for them to grow. They've already, eaten all the grass that's going to put all their bone down. And Jerseys have a tremendous amount to offer cattle. Again, they're small frame, similar frame size to an Nguni in terms of, height and weight. Easy calving, great meat quality, more milk production than what you'd want, but good milk production. And we're breeding them over them. So then, then you get your first cross Ngunis, and then we're retaining those heifers, getting our second crosses. So we're actually probably a couple months away from joining our first lot of first crosses, and then, sort of be about a year, and we'll have our first proper crop of second crosses. You do that generation, you do that 4 or 5 times, you get to F4, F5, and, most people would generally acknowledge the animals that you've got as purebred. So you can breed up.
Okay, that makes sense, because I figured it was probably a combination, but that's interesting with the Jersey cow as well. That's something I've actually heard a lot more of recently, that people are, the meat is kind of very underrated. Obviously, it's a good source of A2 milk. So are you going to be raising them just for meat then? Kind of you're just starting them off, or are you doing milk also?
I'm not doing milk. What we're doing is we're buying, let's say we buy 40 Jersey cows out of the dairy, and we run them with our bull, and then we come in and preg test, and we might breed 80% of them. So, there's 8 left over that are empty, and then we finish those 8 on pasture, we get them fat, and then we put them through the butchery. We sell them as dairy beef. It's marketed dairy beef because they have come out of a dairy environment and they've been eating grain while they've been in there. So, it's like a less intensive feedlot system. So we do label the beef so our consumers that want 100% grass-fed and finish only, though, dairy's not for them. But the meat quality is exceptional. We really love it. And then all the other ones that are pregnant, we keep all the calves, all the bull calves get marked as steers, and we grow them out for meat, and then we retain all the heifers to breed over an Nguni bull again.
That makes sense. That's cool. That's an innovative way, I think, to go about doing this. So getting back to maybe like scaling your operation, scaling regenerative management, kind of at the high level, this is something I've talked about a lot in my book, on this podcast, that, it's always, how do we scale regenerative farming? There's all these hurdles. There's a lot, especially so much public land in the U.S., and it's really a management issue. And guys I know are starting to partner with these public authorities to graze public lands in a rotational manner more so. How do you see this happening in Australia? What are the biggest hurdles? And then how do you see yourself, executing on scaling this? Is, a lot of what you're doing leased land, or, working with programs to buy more land? I guess the whole kind of picture, if you could paint that for us. Yeah, sure.
Well, look, for us specifically, we're farming on 3 different properties at the moment, and they're all leased. We don't currently own any farmland. My wife and I have just purchased 150 acres with a house on it, and we settle on that. We get our keys to our house in 2 weeks. We'll be moving out of town with the kids and living on that farm. But that'll be our first, internally owned land that we'll be farming. Everything else is leased. And for me, I'm just pushing all of my cash flow, all of my revenue and all of my effort towards trying to build up some numbers, because I've proven to myself again and again over 4 years that if I grow it, I can sell it. But the reality is, with things like cattle, it takes quite a bit of time to breed them and grow them out ready for processing. It's really a 2-year program plus, 2 years plus. So every time I get a spare few dollars, I go and buy some more cows and find some more land to put them on and, try to grow the herd that way. So we do intensive farming as well, which is poultry and pigs. You can, even though they're on pasture and they're following pasture raised model, systems, they do get grain. And because, those animals grow so fast and you are importing feed, you can scale those enterprises bigger. So I find that those enterprises are a little bit easier to turn up the dial on. If I wanted to go from 350 pigs this year to 700 pigs next year, all I'd have to do is order more piglets and order more grain. We could turn those pigs off, but that'd be relatively simple. So it's the extensive grazing of cattle and sheep that's requiring more time, more capital, more land. There's a bit more of a long play for that. In regenerative agriculture in general and scaling it, there's a lot of big farms out there that are running their properties exceptionally well. Like when I started, the reason I started growing my own food was for myself, because I couldn't find anyone that didn't drench cattle. I went to the local farmers market and spoke to all the beef producers there, and they're all drenching and they're all worming and doing all these different things that I didn't want. So I thought I had to do it myself. But when you get involved in the industry, and I've met, hundreds of Aussie farmers the last few years, there's heaps out there that are doing a great job running their farm at scale, properties that are thousands of acres, hundreds of cattle, and they're doing holistic plant grazing and their animals are unmedicated, but they're not customer facing. I think the real burden stopping this sort of production being scaled is the customer facing end of it. So it's processing, it's distribution, and it's sales. There is a lot of top-notch produce that's being raised in an exceptional way, just landing on the commodity shelves at our supermarkets, and the consumers are clueless as to what they're buying because the industry doesn't have. So, people want to get involved in regen ag and bring something to the table and help the cause, but they're not farmers, or they don't know how to farm, or they don't even want to farm. It's like, that's great. We've probably got all the farmers. We need logistics. We need distribution and processing. They're the bottlenecks.
Is there a lot of regulatory hurdles here as well? Because that's one of the biggest issues in the U.S. But totally agree with the direct-to-consumer marketing distribution front probably being the biggest need.
Yeah, there is a lot of regulatory stuff here. I think we're better and worse than the States. Like, you guys seem to have more exemptions for really small-scale stuff. So you look at guys like Salatin I think they can do 10,000 birds a year with absolutely no oversight. And then that 10,001st bird, the regulatory capture to get into that's enormous. We don't have any exemptions for scale. So if you're involved, if you're doing 10 birds, you have to tick all the same boxes as everyone else. But there are, abattoirs here and there that you can go and give them your 10 birds to, and they'll process them and give them back, and they're all ticked. And it's really not as challenging as people think. I hear people complain about the red tape all the time, but I think it's because they're not willing to, open up the laptop and do a bit of study and call around and get in the car and drive to where they need to go. Everyone wants it to drop in their lap. And I think just by proxy of the movement, it attracts a lot of well-meaning people who are, wanting to do all the right things for all the right reasons, but they just maybe don't have the grit or the effort needed to really, push through those initial barriers. No businesses are easy, Tristan, and you don't need to hear this, but maybe someone does. Like, people complain that farming's hard and there's all these barriers in front of them. And sure, it's challenging. It's dangerous at times. It's capital hungry. You're reliant on the weather. But so's heaps of stuff. I've been involved in lots of different industries. I've got a restaurant. I've got a bicycle shop. Used to run an e-commerce business. They're all challenging. They've all got regulatory capture. they've all got cash flow issues. They've all got compliance issues. They've all got staffing issues. Agriculture is not really unique in that regard. So the thing I really like about agriculture is you can brand the product as your own and own your own product instead of, selling something on behalf of someone else. I think there's just so much potential there.
Yeah, that's a great perspective to have, and probably something that needs to be heard from a lot of people is that, there's always hurdles, especially in something that, is quite disruptive in terms of the style that you're doing it in. But there's always ways to get to the finish line or get where you want to go. But like you just said, it's really cool to be, and this is something have found. It's like, I wanted to, start businesses, obviously make money, but if you're passionate about something and then simultaneously improving the quality of other people's lives, which is exactly what you're doing with, your farm, is, really going to push you to overcome whatever is thrown your way, really. And that's what it's all about. And, we're just getting started here. So that's what's most exciting. I wanted to ask quickly about the multi-species grazing. Kind of, are you implementing that in some specific way? This is kind of a controversial topic in the regenerative ag space, I would say, at least from my understanding and everyone I've talked to. Some are very pro multi-species grazing, some are not. Some say only do ruminants. And then obviously, as you mentioned, from an enterprise perspective, using monogastrics is a good way to, scale something quickly. And you can still have a way higher quality product than anything at the grocery store. Are you interested in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished bison meat? I'm excited to be a partner with Falls Family Ranches. Based in Wyoming, Falls Family Ranches is raising high-quality bison meat the way nature intended. As a native large ruminant of North America, bison is one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can consume. If you're interested in trying out their bison boxes, use code Tristan, TRISTAN, 10 for 10% off your first order.
Yeah, well, look, we do beef, pork, chicken, lamb, and eggs, so and a bit of honey as well. So we've definitely gone the multi-species way. I wouldn't recommend people do what I do. Like, I don't think that it's necessary, and I don't think that it's not easy. I think I did it all because I wanted to. I've never had any farming experience, so I wanted to farm cattle and pigs and eggs and sheep, and see what I enjoyed the most and see what suited my systems. And the longer I'm doing it, the more I'm figuring out. I don't have any plans to cull any of my enterprises, but there's definitely some that I'm considering. Maybe they're not the ones to scale. Maybe we've got to go chase over here. And I've been able to run profit and losses and balance sheets for years on each enterprise and figure out what works for us, what our market wants. I never really wanted to do sheep, but I thought I'd give sheep a go. And through doing sheep, I figured out that they're far more profitable than cattle. I wouldn't have necessarily have thought that coming into it. So, there's this great little things you can pick up. But I think if you're a customer-facing farm and you're selling direct to market, my inclination is that it'd be really powerful to have one ruminant, whether that's cattle or sheep or buffalo or whatever you want to have one intensively farmed enterprise. And that doesn't have to be chickens or pigs. You could find something else intensive. You could have trout ponds on your farm, or farm fish, or whatever it might be. You could do soldier fly larvae and sell them dehydrated as chicken food, whatever it is. And then I think that each of those products each of those enterprises should have a hero product. So let's say you chose lamb and pork as your extensive and intensive complementary enterprises. Which we actually need to do because the cost of land is so high that we couldn't ever pay the bills just by doing extensive. We would need these complementary enterprises. If you're doing lamb and pork, with your lamb, you could have a hero product of lamb tallow, and you could use that sort of waste stream of that extra fat. You could render it down and then have a value add, high margin, shelf stable, easy to ship hero product. And then with your pigs, you could do the same thing. You could do lard, or you could do dehydrated pet treats with your nose, your tongue, your ears, your tail. You could do some charcuterie, some salami, or some other shelf-stable goods. So that's what I would recommend people to do. Don't do what I do. There's a lot going on, and I'm probably sucker for punishment, but I also think I've for people that are new and wanting to get into agriculture and, start their little family farm, quit their 9 to 5. I was in a bit of a different spot. I've been self-employed since I left school. I've run multiple businesses. I've got quite a big team of employees around me. So I feel like I was able to sort of take the brunt of the onslaught of attention and effort that those enterprises needed because of my previous, experience and resources.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. And you sprinkled in things in there that is important, like the value-added products, utilizing the whole animal. These are often, things that seem obvious, but people don't really focus on. And most people, they're just, selling meat by, actually most ranchers in the U.S. are probably just selling bulk meat locally or wholesaling it. So they're not taking advantage of the whole animal, and they're not obviously most of them are not going direct to consumer. And then most are not thinking of these value-added products, which is something I've realized is kind of the key to, having the cash flow and the ability to stay afloat. So that's great advice. And it's cool to think about coupling the enterprises in a way that makes sense for your environment as well. And I think the multi-species grazing overall, if you can figure that out, I think it's going to vary depending on the situation, but it's always helpful to have a business background, I would say. And something that's nice as well for you is how far are you from, or where are you selling most of your meat? Is it just locally, or is there a lot of customers?
Well, a lot of it's local
as well.
A lot of it's local in my hometown, Albury here, but we've recently, we've been shipping into Melbourne for about a year, which is really growing nicely. And we've recently just opened up domestic freight. So we're shipping to Perth, Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Brisbane, and then a lot of surrounding suburbs. So we do we're very well covered in metro areas, but regional gets more and more complicated with refrigerated supply. But we're really trying to ship to anyone who wants it. I don't want any barriers. If you want it, I'll sell it to you, and I'll get it to you if I can.
I think that's the way to do it. And something that's also unique that you do and that you kind of preach a bit is accept Bitcoin for payment. And I know Slim was down here, did the Beef Initiative in Australia, and we've talked to folks like Jason Rick, who's accepting a Bitcoin for beef. I've sold some bison for Bitcoin. There's not a ton of people, but it seems to be growing. I'm curious, how did you get into Bitcoin? Was this before or after the farm started? And how has the reception been from the people when you've advocated for accepting this?
Yeah, I'm a relatively new Bitcoiner. I during lockdowns in COVID, a mate of mine, in our town, Australia was very hard on the whole lockdowns thing, and you couldn't do much. And even if you wanted to go do stuff, everything was closed. So a friend of mine, we got onto one of the crypto exchanges and just started day trading, trying to catch pumps with all these altcoins, all these crappy cryptos, and I didn't have much of an awareness, and we were just day trading and trying to make some cash and laughing at each other, and he ended up doing really well and I ended up doing really poorly. But through doing that, I realized that all the different cryptos out there were not equal, and there was a few that stood out to me of actually having a bit of technology behind them versus other ones that were literally just caricatures of animals and just big pump and dump Ponzi schemes. And then I got all my cash out. The world started opening back up, and I started, doing what I did again. And then I cut up a body of beef for a guy because we do some custom processing here, so someone can consign a body of beef to us through the abattoir, and we'll cut and package it for them. And I was packing his boxes. He had requirements. The beef was to be split into 16ths. And he sent me the packing sheet of who each box was going to, and I was labeling it all, and it had payment methods: fiat, Bitcoin. And I called him and I said, "Are you selling some of this beef for Bitcoin?" And he said, "Absolutely." And he orange pilled me. He got into me and got me on the page. And I thought, well, I'm going to start accepting Bitcoin for my meat. So I didn't even have my website set up at that time. So I got my website built. One of the first things we did was get the software built in, so you can buy products. You can buy tickets to our events. You can buy lard and beef and pork and whatever you want. And when you get to the checkout page, you can select Bitcoin and you can pay with, it's all on chain at the moment. And it's been going really well. I haven't sold any meat to people who are not Bitcoiners and thought, I'm going to try this Bitcoin thing. But I have had a lot of Bitcoiners who want to buy meat and probably would never have bought off me because of distance and all this sort of stuff. Now come on and support me. It's like there's two guys in Perth that place orders with me semi-regularly. Like Perth's like, I don't know what it is. It's like 4,000, 5,000 kilometers away. You know, it's on the very opposite side of Australia. It's like New York to LA, you know. And it makes no sense to buy off me, but they want to buy off, another Bitcoiner. They appreciate that they can actually spend their Bitcoin and they want to support that emerging industry. And it's lots of fun. I really enjoy it. And, there's quite a lot of people that buy off me using pseudonyms. So I'm sending to locker addresses and I don't know who's buying it. And that's fine. The funds are in my account. Out goes the meat. Off you go.
Yeah, once you tap into that Bitcoiner network, I think people be surprised how supportive they are, because there's really not a lot of options. And I don't know how it is here in Australia, but it's definitely still pretty sparse. Even in the US, I know Austin is kind of like a hub. There's a lot of beef producers there that take Bitcoin. But yeah, I think it's an easy way to set yourself apart. And hey, I mean, all our perspectives are pretty aligned. So I think it's just an easy way to better market your business.
Yeah, it's fun. I've made a heap of really good mates by doing it. Picked up some customers I probably wouldn't have picked up. And, I'm not an investor and I'm not a speculator. I'm a businessman. So it suits me just fine earning my sats.
So since you've been more involved with Bitcoin and connecting with Bitcoiners, has your perspective on other things changed? Because, if you're already into the regenerative farming and understand the importance of, proof of work, quality, low time preference, pretty much just personal responsibility, obviously is a big advocate or big, I guess, kind of thing that you preach. How else has getting connected with these folks and this mindset kind of shifted your perspective?
I don't think it's shifted too much. I think that I've just probably found, a good extension of my tribe, found a lot of people that I have a lot in common with. I was really easy to orange pill because I knew that the current fiscal system was rubbish. Got all this fake money just getting printed and, since everything's been debased, like that was not new knowledge to me. I think a lot of people, they sort of do that whole journey at once, but I was already sort of on top of a lot of that. And I just hadn't realized that, until I spoke to this guy and he sort of pilled me. Like I said, I didn't realize the proof of work aspect of Bitcoin and the value needed to generate it to produce one. So it's just been, it's been cool having that community, and it's a good broad range of people. There's a lot of skill sets that you can tap into. There's a lot of people, a lot of experience you can tap into, and it's such a generous group. Everyone's happy to share knowledge and stuff. So hoping to get to my first bush bash soon. I was meant to go to one of the recent bush bashes here, but I got really crook and couldn't go. So I haven't been to one yet, so I'm hanging out for that.
Yeah, I highly recommend. The meetups are always a ton of fun, but it makes sense. Like you see them, before we even talked about Bitcoin on the podcast, it's kind of just seem you're very aligned, and those types of people are the best to bring into the community, because it's like you're already building solutions that are very aligned, very adjacent to Bitcoin. So I think that's what it's all about, really. Have other ranchers in your area, or farmers, I know you guys don't use that term really here, ask you about accepting Bitcoin or just in general, like your management style, the Nguni, has this kind of ruffled feathers at all, or are people pretty open to it and you think are going to shift kind of their practice, their management styles to be similar? It's
really split. Like I get laughed at and teased at a lot on social media. Like there's a really big farming community on Twitter that's very conventional, and I'm a big joke for that crowd, because everything I do sort of taking old Jersey culls out of a dairy and then breeding them with some African animal that's got a horn and a hump, and then trying to sell it to consumers through my own butchery as prime beef. Like it just sounds like an absolute joke. It's like, what's the punchline? These guys just don't get it. But I think that the way they do things is pretty sad. They breed a black cow that the market says it wants, and every other cow's worthless, even though black means it's it's racism, it's bigotry towards animals. And they do all this work all year, and at the end of the year, they hold out their hat and they get what they're given, because they're price takers and not price makers. And that's, I'm not trying to run down what they do. I think that the whole way they do things is really sad on the way the industry's got it all shaped up. But on the flip side, there are a lot of boys that it's like traditional sort of conventional farmers that do find it really interesting, and they normally slide into the DMs or they normally call me. It's not normally public facing sort of conversations. There's one guy just north of here that's borrowed one of my Nguni bulls. He's a cropper. He's got a merino sheep operation and he crops. And he borrowed an Nguni bull, and when he went and bought 20 Jersey cows, and he came down here and delivered the bull back to me a month ago, and he said, "Oh, do you want to go for lunch?" I said, "Yeah, let's go for lunch." And he said, "Tell me about Bitcoin." And we sat down there and we had our first orange pilling. So there are some guys that are interested in. I think that the longer it's interesting, Tristan, when I started, because all the homesteaders 3-4 years ago loved what I was doing and wanted to support it, wanted to buy a little bit of beef mince and help me out, and all the the bigger guys probably thought, here's another young naive kid who thinks he's got all the world's issues sorted out. And I definitely was naive, because how can you not be naive when you walk into a whole new industry that's as vast and as sophisticated as agriculture? And now I'm sort of like, I'm getting homesteading types approaching me saying, "Oh, how do I do this do your systems work on a smaller scale?" I'm like, well, I'm still regarded as small scale to the big boys, but now the little homesteaders sort of think I'm too big for them, and I'm in this sort of funny middle ground, I guess, where it's a sort of an odd-sized enterprise. But yeah, like lots of, I guess, to answer the question, there is a lot of interest, but you just got to pick your mark. Some people are never going to change, and that's okay. They can do what they do. I'm not here to lecture people who don't want to change their system.
Yeah, I think leading by example like you're doing is just the best way to go about it. Everyone's going to, there's going to be critics that'll eventually come around, some that'll never come around because they're just too stubborn, they're too ingrained, entrenched in what they do. And then, there's going to be folks who are open-minded. So that's kind of what I've seen. And it's interesting. I still think that the consumers really are driving a lot of the change, probably even more so than the producers. And if you're saying that in your region, the consumers are really open, asking, demanding for high quality grass-fed, grass-finished beef, then that's half the battle right there. So that's fantastic. And hopefully we can continue this kind of momentum across the systems in the US and Australia. It's exciting, and I think it's just, the more folks that pop up and share their story, which you've done on social media, the more people are going to find out that message. And that's how we keep building and keeping, everybody aware of what actually works. Because, one of the fundamental principles of Bitcoin, I think, is the truth and the proof of work. It'll resonate, right? Like, if it works, you will be around thriving in another 5 years. And if you don't, or if it doesn't work, then you won't be. So that's really all that matters at the end of the day. And people will notice eventually.
Yeah, definitely. Stay in your lane, practice what you preach, and like you said, be that example. And, I've taken plenty of L's, plenty of things I've tried to do haven't worked out, and that's okay. There's unfortunately, there's not a rule book to read from. So we just got to keep, trying to pioneer these different things and innovate some new strategies in this marketplace and crack on with it.
Yeah, I guess on that note, maybe last question here, wrapping up. What are some few, I guess, things that didn't work out that you probably really felt strongly that they were going to? And maybe some best practices for folks who are trying to get into this space. You already gave a lot of tips, but I'm curious, since you just mentioned that, some things that maybe didn't work out that you for sure thought would have.
Yeah, look, there's no catastrophic failures, but, some things that I wouldn't advise people to do, and this isn't rocket science stuff, but when I started, I didn't have any water infrastructure built in on the farm, so I was hauling water, and I was filling up IBCs on the back of utes and driving them around. Just an absolute nightmare. Never haul water. Plumb it in if you can, and if you can't plumb it in, ask yourself why you can't plumb it in. It'll just kill you hauling water. It's a horrible thing to do. We've had a heap of little failures, but I don't know what the lessons out of them are. 2019 when I bought my first flock of 400 hens, there was an enormous bushfire not far from us, and the air was so thick with smoke you couldn't see 10 meters, 15 meters away. There was no visual. and it was enormously hot. And I just, it was like 45 degrees and windy, and I just came out. I was out the farm one day about 10 o'clock, and my chooks were doing okay, and I had a sprinkler on for them, trying to look after them. And then I came out 4 hours later, and half my chickens were in a big pile dead. Could I have done things better? I'm sure I could have saved them if I would have known they were that close to it. But at the same time, enormous bushfire and very hot day, and there's always little sort of, I've built portable structures for animals that have fallen apart. I've built fences on farms that haven't kept animals in. I've finished animals for the butchery that were too skinny and too fat. Like everything that can go wrong, I've done it. But a few things, like if you want another couple pearls of wisdom potentially for people looking to start, don't buy animals online. Like, don't go onto your Craigslist, Gumtree, Facebook, whatever it is, and type in pigs and then go buy the cheapest piglets that you find on those things. Like, they are going to be full of worms. They're going to be sick. They're going to have pneumonia. They're going to have patches of hair falling out of them. I've done that, and it was shit. Like, the cheapest pigs I've ever bought ended up being the most costly pigs I've ever owned, because they killed other pigs with the diseases they brought on the farm. So, get online, try find a reputable breeder who's got some sort of shared values, support them, build that community, you buy pigs off a pig farmer, and all of a sudden you've got a phone line to a pig professional for when you need help, so, that would be plumb your water in and buy good animals. There you go.
That's smart, because it is tempting, right? My sister's kind of homesteading or just starting, and she's definitely on the Facebook train, and I feel like it's always it might be cheap, but it's probably going to be more effort than you realize in the long run. So that aligns really well, right? Don't trust, verify,
Right.
And put in that work to understand that it's probably worth it to pay for something of higher quality in the long term, that low time preference. So hell yeah, Jake. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Where can folks find you and your farm? I don't know how many Aussie listeners we have. We probably have a sprinkle few.
Sure.
But yeah, where can folks find you?
Yeah, my website is wolkifarm.com.au. I'm on Twitter at Jake Wolki, Wolki. On Facebook, Instagram, all the normal spots. Got a YouTube channel, but most of the media comes up through Twitter. And if people want to purchase, it's via the website.
Awesome. Well, I love it, man. Appreciate everything that you're doing. It's cool to see this in another continent, and the same kind of mindset is proliferating here. So hopefully one day I can come in and check it out in person. But appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for tuning in to another episode of Decentralized Radio. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tristan.